My name is Emily Parker. I am 33 years old, and for most of my life, my parents made sure I knew my place was always second to my sister Olivia. This Christmas should have been about family laughter and tradition, but instead I found myself sitting at the table watching my children shrink into silence while Olivia was treated like royalty. My parents asked her exactly what she wanted for the holiday menu, every detail down to the dessert, while not once turning to Grace or Ethan. Then my father's voice cut the room in half with words I will never forget, and Olivia's smirk told me I was meant to stay quiet and accept it. That was the moment I realized something had shifted, and the night was about to take a turn none of us could undo. What could possibly push a daughter to finally break the silence? And how far would you go if it were your children being humiliated in front of everyone? Stay with me, because what happened after that question changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and family. The cold December air stung my cheeks as I tightened my grip on Grace's hand and urged Ethan to keep up. The Parker estate rose in front of us, glowing with hundreds of twinkling white lights strung across the massive oak trees and along the stone pillars. I had driven my old Honda all the way from our small apartment in Dorchester to the suburbs of Boston, where the streets curved around manicured lawns and every house looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine spread. My parents' mansion, with its 8 bedrooms and white columns, always stood out the most. I balanced the warm pie dish in my other hand, feeling the sweet scent of cinnamon and apples seep through the foil. Grace carried a small gift bag she had decorated herself with red paper cutouts while Ethan trudged beside me, holding on to the edge of my coat like he always did when he felt nervous. As we walked up the stone steps, the front door opened before I could reach for the bell. Helen, the longtime housekeeper, gave me a small smile. Her eyes flicked toward the dining room and she whispered, "It's tense tonight. Be careful." Then she quickly took the pie from my hands and my kids' coats, her kindness the only warmth I expected to find here. The voices of my parents echoed through the wide entry hall. My father's tone was sharp, clipped with authority, and my mother's laugh carried its usual note of superiority. I guided Grace and Ethan into the living room. My parents sat on their usual perch, my mother in her silk blouse and pearls, my father with his tailored suit even on Christmas Eve. Olivia lounged across the velvet sofa, her blonde hair in perfect waves, legs crossed, a glass of wine balanced effortlessly in her hand. "Oh, you made it," Margaret said without rising. "For a moment I thought you might have gotten lost again." "We had car trouble," I answered softly, guiding the children closer. "But we're here now." Richard folded his newspaper and glanced at his watch. "Punctuality is a virtue, Emily. It seems you've forgotten that." Olivia smirked, swirling her wine. Maybe if she had a real car instead of that rusty thing, she wouldn't always have these problems. Ethan stiffened next to me, his little hand tightening around mine. I pretended not to hear, but my heart sank knowing he had. "Dinner is nearly ready," my mother announced, already turning back to Olivia. "But before we eat, we should decide on the Christmas menu for tomorrow." My father reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his small leather notebook, the one he usually used for investment ideas. "All right," he said, "why don't we hear from our guest of honor first? Olivia, what would you like for Christmas dinner?" Olivia's smile widened, as if she had been waiting all night for that invitation. "Well, I was thinking of roasted prime rib with garlic butter. Maybe lobster tails, too. And definitely that truffle macaroni and cheese from the catering company. Oh, and champagne, of course." "Excellent," my father said as he scribbled in his notebook. "Margaret, what about sides? I'll prepare my cranberry orange relish and order those petit fours from the French bakery," she replied. "And dessert?" Olivia chimed in, leaning forward. "I want chocolate soufflé, the one with the raspberry glaze." As they spoke, I glanced at Grace and Ethan. Their faces lit up at the mention of chocolate, but they stayed silent, waiting politely as they always did. I gave them an encouraging nod. My father shut his notebook with a satisfied thud and looked around the room. "Well, that settles it. A perfect menu." The silence that followed pressed heavily against my chest. Grace shifted in her seat, her lips parting slightly as if she might ask about her favorite pumpkin pie. But my mother cut her off with a wave of her manicured hand. "Your children can eat whatever leftovers are in the kitchen," she said smoothly. "They're not guests here." The words landed like a slap across my face. Ethan's hand tightened so hard in mine I thought my fingers might bruise. Grace's eyes filled with confusion, her small body stiffening beside me. I felt my throat close, my breath caught between outrage and despair. Olivia laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Don't take it personally, Emily. You should be grateful they even get a seat at the table." My father leaned back, crossing his legs. "Go set the table like a good girl. That's what you're good at, isn't it? Taking care of details." For a moment, the room blurred around me, the sparkling chandelier, the scent of pine from the towering Christmas tree, the faint crackle of the fireplace. All I could see were my children's faces, pale and silent, their dignity stripped in front of the people who should have cherished them most. I wanted to shout, to slam the pie dish onto the floor, to drag my children out and never return. But years of practice kept me rooted in my seat, my expression neutral. I reached for their hands instead, squeezing gently. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, did we do something wrong?" I forced a smile, though my heart ached. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong." Olivia reclined back against the sofa, lifting her glass of wine as if to toast her own victory. My parents resumed their casual chatter, discussing table settings and guest lists, as though my children's humiliation had never happened. I sat there quietly, a smile fixed on my lips, but inside something shifted. I looked at the glittering ornaments on the Christmas tree and realized I had been here too many times before, always silent, always swallowing the insult. This time felt different. This time I could feel a spark rising in my chest, one that I could no longer ignore. The sound of clinking glasses filled the room as Olivia laughed again, and my father nodded along with her. Grace lowered her head and Ethan leaned against me, his little shoulders trembling. I held them close, my smile steady, even as I knew something inside me was breaking free. And at that moment, surrounded by golden light and expensive decorations, I decided that this Christmas would not end the way they expected. I was 10 the first time I realized my place in the Parker family was different from my sister's. That birthday still sits heavy in my chest whenever December rolls around. My cake had been a simple sheet cake from the local grocery store, vanilla with too much icing that made my teeth ache. There were no balloons, no streamers, no friends filling the backyard, just my parents, Olivia and Helen, carrying the cake to the dining room table. Olivia clapped her hands dramatically and leaned forward to blow out the candles with me, stealing the moment as she always did. My mother had snapped a few quick photos, then hurried to take a phone call. By the time the candles were cleared, the day already felt forgotten. But when Olivia's birthday came each spring, the house transformed. The grand staircase was wrapped in flowers. A string quartet played in the living room, and caterers bustled through the kitchen. My parents invited dozens of guests, business partners, neighbors, family friends, and everyone was told how special my sister was. She would open a mountain of gifts, while photographers clicked away. My father beamed at her as if she were a princess, and my mother's smile stretched wider than the expensive pearl necklace she always wore for those occasions. I remember tugging at my mother's sleeve once, whispering that maybe my next birthday could have a few balloons too. She looked down at me with that cold half-smile and said, "Olivia brings people together, Emily, and you should be proud of her." That was her way of saying no. High school only deepened the divide. Olivia's dance recitals were attended by every relative we had. She always got the front page of the family scrapbook with her perfect curls and her pink tutu. When I won the state spelling bee, my father clapped politely, said, "Of course you did well, you had nothing else to distract you." There was no party, no framed certificate hung on the wall. My achievements were expected, almost invisible. The pattern followed us into adulthood. In 2010, I earned a scholarship to Boston University. I was so proud, so sure my parents would be thrilled that I had lifted a financial burden off their shoulders. Instead, my father muttered that teaching was such a modest career for someone with my background. Olivia had enrolled at Brown that same year, but she dropped out after 3 semesters. My parents never criticized her. They only said she was too bright to be confined by traditional education, and they bought her a condo downtown to give her space to discover herself. When I graduated in a simple navy gown, I scanned the crowd for my parents. They were there, but the applause they gave me was faint, distracted. Later, my mother whispered that my hair looked flat under the cap. Olivia, who had not even finished college, still received more praise that night than I did for 4 years of hard work. It was Patricia, my godmother, who noticed. She had been my mother's closest friend back in their college days, but somewhere along the line they fell apart. I remember overhearing a fight when I was a teenager, Patricia raising her voice, telling my mother that I deserved to feel loved as much as Olivia. My mother hissed that Patricia should mind her own business. That was the last time I ever saw them together. Patricia sent birthday cards for a few years, but eventually, even those stopped and I grew used to the quiet absence. As I sat in my parents' living room on Christmas Eve, the firelight reflecting off the crystal ornaments, those memories came rushing back. I watched Olivia lean comfortably against the velvet sofa while my mother poured her another glass of wine, smiling like a hostess entertaining royalty. My father scribbled in his leather notebook, nodding at every suggestion Olivia made for the Christmas dinner. My children sat silently at the edge of their chairs, Grace's hands folded in her lap, Ethan staring down at the polished floorboards. It was as if the decades had folded into one moment, every slight, every dismissal layered into the air between us. I could still feel the sting of my father's words from years ago, calling me practical as if it were a flaw, telling me I should be grateful for stability when Olivia was given freedom. My mother's face forever tilted toward my sister, never toward me. Olivia caught my eye across the room and smirked. It was the same smirk she wore at my 10th birthday when she blew out my candles. I realized she knew exactly what she was doing then and now. And my parents allowed it because it was easier to idolize her than to recognize me. Grace nudged me gently and whispered, "Mom, do you think Grandma liked my drawing?" I forced a smile, but I remembered how many of her pictures had been tucked into a drawer, never taped to the refrigerator the way Olivia's childhood sketches once were. Ethan shifted closer, pressing his small shoulder against mine for comfort. My chest tightened as I sat there, smiling faintly at the conversation I was not invited into, holding on to my children who deserved so much better. For years I told myself that enduring it was noble, that keeping peace at the family table mattered more than my pride. But in that moment, with Olivia glowing under the spotlight and my children shrinking under the weight of silence, I felt something inside me stir. The piano in the next room began to play a carol, and the notes drifted in, sweet but hollow. I looked at the towering tree with its gold ribbons and crystal ornaments, at my mother's satisfied smile, at my father's sharp profile, and then back at Olivia's smug expression. A voice inside me, one I had buried long ago, whispered that enough was enough. I sat a little straighter, my hand resting firmly on Grace's shoulder, the other around Ethan's. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel small. I did not feel invisible. I felt the weight of years pressing down, but I also felt the faint beginnings of a resolve I had never let myself imagine. The sound of glasses clinking jolted me back to the present. Olivia laughed loudly, my parents joined in, and the moment passed for them. But not for me. For me, something had already shifted, something that could not be unshaken. The dining room shimmered under the light of the chandelier, casting a golden glow across the polished mahogany table. Crystal goblets sparkled, silver cutlery gleamed, and the scent of rosemary and garlic floated in the air. My children sat at the far end of the table beside me, their little bodies straight as boards, trying to remember every lesson I had whispered about table manners. Across from us, Olivia leaned back comfortably, her hand resting on the stem of her wine glass as if she owned the evening. She spoke easily, her voice rising above the quiet clinking of utensils. Last summer in Saint-Tropez, the weather was perfect. We stayed right on the water, and the villa had the most breathtaking view. Then she laughed softly, a sound rehearsed for admiration. My mother's eyes sparkled as she leaned closer. "Tell me more about the villa, darling. Was it the one you showed me in that magazine?" Olivia nodded, her smile broadening. "Yes, the very one. Father insisted I deserved it." My father, sitting at the head of the table, cleared his throat with approval. "Of course. Only the best for Olivia. You work hard at making us proud." Grace reached for her glass of water, carefully, her fingers trembling. She glanced at me, her hazel eyes searching mine, but I only gave her a small nod, urging her to stay calm. Ethan poked at his plate, the fork scraping lightly against the china. The sound drew a sharp glance from my mother. "Richard, did you hear that? Emily's children really must learn to be less fidgety at the table." Heat spread across my chest, but I kept my smile steady. "They are only children, Mother. They are doing their best." Olivia lifted her fork delicately, her rings catching the light. "Maybe they just need more practice. When we were little, I never fidgeted at the table. Father used to say I was born with poise." My father chuckled, pleased by the memory. "That is true. You always carried yourself like a young lady." I swallowed hard, the bite of food in my mouth turning to ash. Grace dropped her gaze to her lap, her small fingers clutching her napkin. Ethan pressed his lips together tightly, his little face reddening. I wanted to reach for them both, to shield them from every word, but I sat still, my hand resting lightly on the edge of the table. The chatter around me continued, a chorus of admiration for Olivia, every sentence sharpening the invisible line that divided us. Olivia leaned forward, her tone bright. "I have been thinking of spending a few weeks in Europe again this spring. Florence this time, perhaps Paris. I think it is important to expose ourselves to culture." My mother sighed with delight. "Yes, of course, it broadens the mind. That is why you are so refined, Olivia." I watched Grace's lips part slightly, almost as if she might speak, then close again. She wanted to share her own dream, the way she drew pictures of Paris and taped them to her bedroom wall, but she stayed silent. Ethan took a sip of water, his eyes fixed on his plate. The ache in my chest deepened, a familiar ache that had grown with me since childhood. The same ache I had felt on birthdays, graduations, every holiday where Olivia's voice filled the air while mine was drowned out. But seeing it play out again, this time with my children caught in the line of fire, felt unbearable. My father reached for his notebook again, scribbling something between bites of roasted lamb. He barely glanced at me, his pen scratching against the page. Grace whispered softly, just loud enough for me to hear. "Mom, do you think Grandma liked my drawing?" I forced a smile and squeezed her hand under the table. Of course she did, sweetheart. But I knew the truth. I had seen my mother take that carefully drawn picture earlier, holding it with 2 fingers as though it might soil her silk blouse, then hand it to Helen to put away. Not a word of admiration, not even a smile. Just another dismissal. Ethan shifted closer, his shoulder brushing mine. His voice trembled as he whispered, "Mom, did we do something wrong?" My throat tightened. "No, honey, you did nothing wrong." Olivia's laugh rang out again, filling the silence between us. She raised her glass toward my parents. "To my family, the people who make life worth living." The words stung more than they should have, dripping with irony, because I knew who she meant. To her family meant admiration gifts, money vacations, and the endless approval that followed her like a shadow. To me, it had always meant silence and sacrifice. I sat still, the chatter continuing around me, the fire popping in the hearth, the crystal glasses clinking. My smile remained fixed, but inside something had begun to unravel. I could feel the edges of my composure fraying, the weight of years pressing down harder than ever. I lifted my glass of water and took a slow sip, watching the condensation trail down the side. The chandelier's light refracted through the crystal, scattering golden flecks across the white tablecloth. Everything looked perfect, polished, untouchable. But beneath the shine, I could see the cracks forming, cracks no one else wanted to admit were there. Olivia turned to my mother and began recounting another story of a gala she had attended in New York, her voice brimming with pride. My parents leaned in captivated, as if every word she spoke was a jewel to be treasured. I looked down the table at my children, their small frames swallowed by the grandeur of the setting. Their voices silenced their worth questioned, and I knew deep down that something had to change. The laughter of my family swelled again, but in my ears it sounded hollow, like glass about to shatter. Chapter 4. I slipped out of the dining room quietly, telling Grace and Ethan I needed a moment. They nodded, their small faces pale under the chandelier's glow. My chest felt tight and I needed air, even if it was just the kind that drifted in from the kitchen with the scent of roasted lamb and garlic butter. The house had always felt like a stage, every room lit just right, every corner curated for display. But the kitchen late at night often revealed the cracks. Helen was gone, probably setting more dishes in the pantry, and the lights were dimmer here. I paused when I heard voices. My mother's sharp and clipped, and Olivia's smooth and satisfied. I froze, pressing my back against the doorway, the marble counter cool against my palm. My mother's voice carried first. "Emily will break eventually. She always does. She has no backbone, never did." Olivia gave a soft laugh. I almost felt sorry for her, but really it is better this way. She can handle the scraps. Besides, we both know she has no choice. My stomach turned, but I couldn't move. Margaret continued, her tone icy. "We need her. Richard and I have talked, and Olivia, you know we cannot keep this up forever. The creditors are circling, and if the investigation digs any deeper, well, appearances must be maintained. Emily still believes she owes us. She will carry it if we push hard enough." Olivia's laugh grew louder. "That is true. She has always been easy to bend. Let her think it is her duty. Once she agrees, she will bury herself under our weight, and no one will blame us." The words sank into me like stones. My pulse pounded in my ears as the truth twisted inside me. All these years I had told myself their coldness was personal, that it was simply favoritism, a cruel habit they could not break. But this was calculated. They wanted to break me down, to make me accept responsibility for debts I didn't create, to use me like a shield against the storm they had brought upon themselves. Footsteps echoed closer, and I ducked behind the pantry door. Olivia's heels clicked against the tile as she crossed the kitchen. She poured herself another glass of wine, humming softly. She looked radiant under the soft light, but I could see the edges of her confidence. Her hand trembled slightly when she lifted the glass, and her smile faltered before she caught herself. Margaret joined her at the counter, pressing her manicured hand against Olivia's arm. "Do not worry. Emily will fold, she always does. And if she hesitates, Richard will remind her." Olivia tilted her glass, her voice smooth again. "Then let us make sure tonight is the night she remembers her place." I felt the words slice through me. My hands trembled, and I pressed them hard against my skirt to steady myself. The urge to storm into the room to scream that I had heard every word boiled up inside me, but instead I stayed silent, my breath shallow. They moved toward the doorway, their voices fading as they returned to the dining room. I stayed hidden until the sound of their laughter blended with the hum of conversation from the other room. When I finally stepped out, the kitchen looked the same as always. Polished counters, gleaming appliances, everything spotless. But it felt different now. I knew their plan. They weren't just indifferent parents favoring one daughter over another. They were preparing to use me as their safety net, to crush me under their mistakes while Olivia floated free. I leaned against the counter, my palms pressed flat against the cold stone, and closed my eyes. My breath came in slow, deliberate pulls. For years, I had endured their scorn in silence, telling myself that keeping the peace mattered more than my pride. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival, mine and my children's. When I returned to the dining room, Olivia was laughing again, her head tilted back, the wine glass glinting in her hand. My father nodded along with her story, my mother hanging on every word. Grace and Ethan sat stiffly, their food barely touched. I slid back into my chair, my smile calm, my hands steady as I laid my napkin across my lap. No one noticed the difference, but inside I felt the shift. They thought they could bend me the way they always had, but this time, they had shown me too much. I looked down the table at my children, their small faces tight with worry. My chest swelled with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I would not let them grow up believing this treatment was normal. I would not let them inherit my silence. As Olivia launched into another story about her latest shopping trip in New York, her laughter ringing through the room, I kept my gaze steady. I smiled when they looked at me, nodding politely, but my mind was elsewhere. I knew then that the night would not end the way they expected. Something inside me had already begun to harden, and for the first time, I welcomed it. The fire in the living room crackled, but it did nothing to cut through the chill that had settled over me. Dinner plates clinked as Helen cleared the table, her quiet efficiency, the only steady rhythm in a night that felt like it was unraveling piece by piece. My father leaned back in his chair, his notebook open, the same one he used for business meetings. His gold pen tapped against the page. Richard adjusted his glasses and spoke in that tone I had known since childhood, the one that sounded like a verdict. "Emily, while Olivia is staying here, you will contribute to the household expenses. It is only fair." Olivia smirked, swirling the last of her wine. She glanced at me, her lips curling into a smile that carried no warmth. "Think of it as helping family," she said sweetly. Though her eyes glittered with triumph, my heart raced, but I kept my face calm. "And what about my children?" I asked. "Are they not considered family at this table?" My mother stiffened. Her gaze was steady but cold, as though she was talking about strangers. "Grace and Ethan will eat whatever is left in the kitchen. This is not complicated." Ethan's hand clutched mine under the table, his small fingers squeezing tight. Grace's eyes filled with confusion, though she said nothing, her lips pressed together in a thin line. My father tapped his pen again, his voice sharper now. "Enough of this emotional display. Go set the table properly for dessert, Emily. Do what you do best and be useful." For a moment, the room blurred. The polished chandelier lights seemed too bright, Olivia's laughter too loud, the clink of crystal glasses too sharp. I felt years of swallowed words press against my chest, and for once, I did not swallow them back. I rose slowly, my chair scraping the floor. Grace and Ethan looked up at me, their faces pale but hopeful. I squeezed their hands gently. "Get your jackets," I whispered. "We are leaving." The room fell silent. Olivia let out a high laugh, shaking her head. "Here we go again," she said. "Always the dramatic one." My father's voice thundered across the table. "Sit down, Emily. You are embarrassing yourself." I stood taller, meeting his glare. "No, I will not sit, not tonight." Margaret's face twisted, her wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. "You cannot walk out. Family loyalty demands better than this." I almost laughed at the word loyalty, the hypocrisy of it so sharp it almost cut through me. "Loyalty goes both ways," I said evenly. "And my children will not sit here another second to be treated like they do not matter." I took Grace and Ethan's hands, guiding them toward the hallway. Their little feet echoed against the marble floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Behind me, my father barked, "If you leave now, do not expect our help when you come crawling back." I turned, my voice steady but fierce. "Help," I repeated. "You never helped when I needed it most. Not when Thomas left. Not when Grace needed braces. Not when Ethan needed childcare so I could work. You gave me judgment, not help. That ends tonight." Olivia stepped into the hallway doorway, blocking us for a moment. She leaned casually against the frame, though her eyes betrayed something restless. "You know they only invited you here because they need something from you," she whispered. "I told them you would never agree unless they broke you first." The truth in her words hit me, but it also cleared the fog. They had revealed themselves fully tonight. I did not need to wonder anymore. "Move, Olivia," I said quietly. She smirked, but there was hesitation before she stepped aside, letting me pass. Grace and Ethan hurried to the coat rack, slipping into their jackets with fumbling hands. I knelt in front of them, my voice low and calm. "We are going to have a special dinner somewhere else. Somewhere we will be treated the way we deserve." Grace's eyes widened. "Are you sure Grandma looks so mad?" I brushed her hair back gently. "I am very sure." I rose and opened the heavy oak door. The winter air rushed in sharp and bracing against my cheeks. Behind me, I could still hear their voices rising and overlapping. Richard's orders, Margaret's pleas, Olivia's mocking laugh. But I did not turn back. As we stepped onto the stone steps, Ethan slipped his small hand into mine. "Are we in trouble, Mom?" he asked softly. I looked down at him, my chest tightening with pride and pain all at once. "No, sweetheart. For the first time in a long time, we are finally out of trouble." We walked toward the driveway where my car waited, its old frame dull beside the gleaming luxury cars lined up in a row. The night sky stretched above us, cold and endless, but I felt lighter with every step away from the house. The voices behind us grew faint as the door shut hard, sealing them inside with their schemes and their pride. Ahead of us was uncertainty, but it was ours. I unlocked the car, the sound of the door latches snapping open, breaking the silence. Grace and Ethan climbed into the back seat, their faces still pale but their eyes brighter. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel. For a long moment I sat there, the engine silent, listening to the soft sound of my children breathing behind me. I could still feel the heat of the dining room, the sting of my father's words, the icy dismissal in my mother's tone. But I could also feel something else rising slowly, steady and strong. I turned the key, and the old engine rumbled to life. The road stretched out in front of me, empty except for the glow of stoplights changing against the dark sky. Grace and Ethan sat quietly in the back seat, their faces reflected in the small square of the rearview mirror. Grace leaned against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Ethan traced a line with his finger across the condensation, his shoulders finally loosening as though some invisible weight had been lifted. I drove without really knowing where I was going, the tires humming against the pavement. The clock on the dashboard glowed just past 8. We had left dinner early, but it felt like a lifetime had passed since the moment my father ordered me to set the table like a servant. My phone buzzed against the console. I ignored it. It buzzed again and then again, vibrating steadily as though it had something urgent to say. I did not even glance at the screen. I knew the names that would be flashing there, and I had no interest in hearing their voices. Instead, I took a deep breath and turned toward downtown. Neon signs flickered ahead, holiday lights strung across the streets. I pulled into the lot outside Morton's, a steakhouse I had only ever passed by on the way to somewhere else. The windows glowed warm gold, and for once I wanted to step inside, no matter the cost. Grace sat up straighter. "Mom, are we really going here?" Her voice was tinged with disbelief. I smiled at her through the mirror. "Yes, sweetheart. Tonight is special." Inside, the air smelled of seared meat and butter. A hostess greeted us with a polite smile, though her eyes flicked over our modest clothes. For a moment, I thought she might send us away, but then she glanced at her tablet and nodded. "We had a cancellation. If you don't mind waiting 15 minutes, I can seat you." "That will be fine," I said, relief washing through me. We waited in the lobby, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women in cocktail dresses. I caught a few glances in our direction, but for once I did not shrink under them. Ethan leaned close, his eyes wide. "This place is really fancy. Do you think they have hamburgers?" I laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "I am sure they do." When our table was ready, the waiter guided us to a booth with crisp white linen and polished silverware. He introduced himself as Anthony, his smile genuine, not forced like so many I had seen earlier that evening. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Grace hesitated, looking at me. I nodded. "2 sodas, please, and a glass of wine for me." As Anthony walked away, Grace leaned across the table, whispering, "Mom, are Grandma and Grandpa going to be mad at us?" I exhaled slowly. They might be upset, yes, but being upset doesn't mean they are right. What matters is that you and Ethan know you deserve respect. Ethan frowned. "Then why did Grandma say we should eat scraps? Did we do something wrong?" The question cut through me. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "You did nothing wrong. Sometimes people say unkind things because they are hurting or scared, but that does not mean it is your fault. Grace lowered her eyes, tracing the edge of her napkin. Are they going to come here and find us? I shook my head gently. Not tonight. Tonight is ours. The drinks arrived, and with them a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in years. Ethan ordered his hamburger complete with aged cheddar and truffle aioli, his face lighting up when the waiter listed the toppings. Grace chose salmon with roasted vegetables, and I picked a modest chicken dish, careful even in my rebellion. When the plates arrived, beautifully arranged with garnishes I could hardly pronounce, both children gasped. Ethan grinned. This is the biggest hamburger I have ever seen. Grace marveled at the delicate flowers laid across her plate. I watched them eat, their shoulders slowly relaxing, the worry easing from their young faces. For the first time that evening, I felt I had given them something they would remember not as pain, but as a gift. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself and stepped into the restroom. The marble counters gleamed under soft lights, and the quiet gave me room to think. My phone vibrated again in my pocket. Against my better judgment, I pulled it out. 20 missed calls. 37 unread messages from my mother. Emily, stop this foolishness and come back immediately. From my father. You are being irrational. Family finances require your attention. From Olivia. You always were selfish. You think you are better than us now? I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then, almost without realizing, I scrolled down to a contact I had not called in years. Patricia Montgomery. My godmother. My finger hovered my chest, tightening. She had sent me cards over the years, each one tucked carefully away, though my parents dismissed them as meddling. I pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before a warm voice answered. Emily, is that you? My throat caught. Hello, Patricia. I hope I am not calling too late. It is never too late to hear from you, dear. You sound upset. What is wrong? The kindness in her voice cracked something in me. Words tumbled out, years of hurt compressed into a rush. I told her about dinner, about the scraps, about Olivia's smirk and my parents' cold commands. I told her about the weight I had carried, about Grace's drawing dismissed without a glance, about Ethan's questions that pierced my heart. When I finally fell silent, the only sound was the faint hum of the restaurant through the door. Patricia's voice came steady and sure. Emily. I have been waiting for this call. I blinked at the mirror, stunned. Waiting. Yes. I always knew one day you would see clearly. Now tell me, are you ready to hear the truth about your family's situation? My pulse quickened. For the first time that night, it wasn't just anger or sadness filling me. It was a curiosity, and something deeper, a quiet strength rising inside. Patricia's voice softened, but every word carried weight. Emily, your parents are not who they pretend to be. Richard's real estate business has been collapsing for years. He has mortgaged the house 3 times over, each time promising the banks he could recover. But now the banks have stopped listening. I gripped the phone tighter. That can't be true. He still throws those charity dinners, still drives the newest cars. Appearances, Patricia said simply. They are living on borrowed money and borrowed time. And Olivia, your sister, she is not as untouched as she seems. I felt my chest tighten. What about Olivia? Patricia hesitated before continuing. Bradley left her months ago. She has been hiding it, telling everyone he is traveling for work. The truth is, he discovered she had drained their accounts and maxed out every credit card. She even secretly mortgaged their house. He could not take it anymore. The words landed like blows, each one sharper than the last. I thought of Olivia tossing her hair, laughing at dinner, smirking when my children were dismissed to the scraps. Behind the polished image, she had been crumbling. Patricia's voice dropped lower. The reason your parents pressed you so hard tonight, the reason they humiliated you in front of your children, is because they need you. They wanted to break you down enough to accept responsibility for all of it. If you had stayed, they would have told you Olivia and her children were moving into your apartment. My knees wobbled. I leaned against the marble counter, staring at my reflection. My eyes looked different, older somehow, but sharper too. My parents had tried to reduce me to silence my whole life. Now I saw the trap they had built. Patricia spoke again, steady and calm. I never wanted to interfere unless you asked me to, but I cannot stay silent anymore. I hold the note on your parents' mortgage. They came to me when the banks refused them. They are already months behind. My breath caught. You hold it, yes, and I have protected you more than you know. Your mother wanted to cut me from your life years ago because I called out their favoritism, but I stayed close enough to make sure you had a lifeline if you ever reached for it. The tears that slipped down my cheeks weren't just from pain. They were from something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Patricia's tone warmed. I am prepared to establish a trust for you and the children, effective immediately. I have no heirs, Emily. I want you to have the security your parents denied you. But more than money, I want you to stand tall, to stop believing you are less than. I pressed my hand against my mouth, the sob rising too fast to contain. Patricia, I didn't call to ask for this. I know, she said firmly. That is why I trust you to use it wisely. And tomorrow I want you to meet with my attorney. He will explain what comes next. But tonight, I want you to remember this moment. You are not powerless. You never were. When I returned to the table, Grace and Ethan were laughing over a shared dessert, their faces bright with sugar and innocence. For the first time in years, I let myself believe in a future that looked different from the one my parents had carved out for me. The waiter stopped by asking if we wanted anything else. I shook my head, smiling softly. No, thank you. This has been perfect. My phone buzzed again as I slipped it into my purse. New messages lit the screen more frantic than before. From Olivia. Please, Emily, call me back. From Margaret. Patricia has spoken to us. We need to explain. From Richard. Do not make any decisions until you hear our side. I silenced the phone, the weight of it heavy in my hand. For years, their voices had dictated the rhythm of my life. Tonight, for the first time, I realized I could choose silence. Outside, the night air was cold against my cheeks as we walked to the car. Ethan skipped ahead, humming softly, and Grace clutched her sketchbook, as though holding on to something she could finally believe in. I opened the car door, letting them climb inside, then paused before sliding into the driver's seat. For years, I had felt trapped, cornered by duty and guilt. But tonight, with Patricia's words still echoing in my mind, I knew something had shifted. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer feared their power. As I started the engine, the headlights cut through the darkness, and I felt the road open before me, not as an escape, but as the beginning of something entirely new. Chapter 8. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, long before the children stirred. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the steam rising and letting Patricia's words replay in my head. The truth had cracked open everything I thought I knew. My parents were drowning, Olivia was already sunk, and they had planned to drag me under with them. A knock rattled the door. At first I thought it was Sandra from down the hall, maybe dropping off muffins as she sometimes did. But the knock grew harder, urgent, the kind that carried anger. My heart sank. I opened the door just a crack, and there they were. Richard, still in his pressed slacks but without a jacket, his face drawn and red. Margaret, her perfect hair undone, strands hanging loose around her pale cheeks. And Olivia wearing sunglasses, though the hallway was dim, her lips tight, eyes hidden but trembling. We need to talk, Richard said, his voice low but forceful. I blocked the doorway with my body. This isn't a good time. Margaret's eyes darted past me into the apartment, catching sight of Grace's crayons scattered across the couch. So it is true. Patricia was here, wasn't she? You let her poison you against us. Poison, I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. No, she just told me the truth. Olivia pulled her glasses off her eyes, rimmed red. Emily, please. They are going to take everything. The house, the cars, all of it. Where am I supposed to go? Where are my children supposed to sleep? My grip on the door tightened. Olivia, you do not even have your children with you tonight. She flinched, then whispered, they are with Bradley. He won't even let me back in the house. Richard stepped forward, trying to push the door. Enough of this nonsense. You are obligated to help. You are family. I stood my ground. Family, I said slowly, has never looked like this. Behind me, Grace's voice piped up, small and uncertain. Mom? Who is it? I turned just enough to see her peeking from the hallway, her hair messy from sleep, her eyes wide. Go back to your room, honey, I said gently. I'll be there soon. She nodded and disappeared, the soft click of her door like a reminder of what I was protecting. Margaret's voice cracked as she spoke. Emily, you don't understand. We need you. The creditors are circling. If you don't step in, everything will collapse. I lifted my chin, then let it collapse. Silence hung heavy. Olivia's face twisted with shock. Richard's jaw clenched, a vein pulsing in his temple. Margaret's eyes glistened, though I could not tell if it was from shame or fury. I opened the door wider, just enough for them to see the truth in my eyes. If you want my help, you ask with respect. You treat me as an adult, not a servant. And you treat Grace and Ethan as family, not as afterthoughts. Richard scoffed, his voice cold. You have no idea what you are saying. Do you think Patricia will save you? She has her own motives. Maybe she does, I said, but at least she treats me with dignity. Olivia reached for my hand, desperation replacing arrogance. Emily, please. Just a few weeks. Let me stay here until I figure something out. Her palm was cold, trembling. I pulled my hand back. 2 weeks. That is all. And if you stay here, you follow my rules. You respect my children." Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing before she bit her lip. Then she nodded slowly. "Fine. 2 weeks." Richard growled, his voice harsh. "You cannot dictate terms to us." I met his glare head on. "Watch me." For the first time in my life, he had no words. The silence between us felt like a wall shifting, the foundation cracking. I stepped back and shut the door, the sound of it closing final and heavy. My heart raced, my knees shook, but inside I felt a strange calm. I leaned against the door, listening to their muffled voices fade down the hall. Grace crept back out, holding Ethan's hand. "Mom, are we in trouble?" I knelt and pulled them close, breathing in the warmth of their small bodies. "No," I whispered. "For once we are not the ones in trouble." Their arms wrapped around me, and I held them tighter, knowing the storm outside had only begun, but also knowing I was no longer afraid to face it. The first sign that everything had spilled into the open came 2 days later, when I pulled into the grocery store lot and saw my parents' faces staring back at me from the cover of the local paper. The headline screamed about Richard Wilson's real estate empire under federal investigation. There was a smaller picture of Olivia, stepping out of a courthouse with her head down, the caption hinting at foreclosure filings. I froze with my hands on the steering wheel, my stomach flipping. For years they had lived as though nothing could touch them. Now the whole town knew. Inside the store I felt eyes on me. A woman from church avoided my gaze near the produce aisle, then leaned to whisper to her husband. At the checkout line, a cashier who had always been polite stared at me with open curiosity before bagging my groceries. I kept my head high, but inside I was trembling, not from shame, but from the realization that the secret storm had finally broken. By the time I returned home, Olivia was sitting on my front steps. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, her designer coat wrinkled, her hair pulled back without care. She jumped up when she saw me, her eyes red from crying. "Emily, you have to help me. The press is everywhere." "I can't go anywhere without cameras." I unlocked the door, calmly shifting the bags in my arms. "Help you how?" "Olivia. By letting you keep pretending nothing is your fault." She followed me. Inside, her words tumbling out. "Bradley is filing for full custody. He says I am unstable, that I squandered everything. He won't even let me pick up the kids without supervision." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I saw not the perfect sister who had always lorded her life over me, but a woman stripped bare. I set the groceries down and faced her. "Olivia, you built your life on appearances. Now the appearances are gone. What matters is what you do from here." She shook her head, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know how to be anything else." Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Patricia. I stepped outside to take the call. Her voice was steady as always. "Emily, I wanted you to know that the banks have begun formal proceedings. Your parents will be forced to vacate the mansion within 60 days. I pressed the phone tighter. "They know, oh, they know. And I imagine they will be at your door again soon. But this time you will be ready." When I hung up, a neighbor was standing across the street, holding her morning paper. She gave me a knowing look, half pity, half curiosity. For the first time in my life, I did not shrink from it. I nodded politely and went back inside. Olivia was pacing the living room, her hands fluttering at her sides. "The kids don't respect me, Emily. They see me as weak now. Even Mom and Dad, they look at me like I'm a disappointment." I almost laughed at the irony. "Now you know how it feels," I said quietly. She froze, then sank onto the couch, covering her face again. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't, not entirely. The following evening, the news stations ran a segment showing my father leaving his office, surrounded by reporters. His voice was sharp, trying to control the narrative, but his words were drowned out by the questions. Margaret was filmed being ushered into a car, her expression tight, her pearl necklace gleaming like armor. Grace watched from the couch, her eyes wide. "Mom, why are Grandma and Grandpa on TV?" I sat beside her, pulling her close. Because sometimes people make mistakes, and when they hide them too long, the truth comes out. Ethan leaned against me. "Are we going to be on TV too, no, sweetheart?" I said, smoothing his hair. "We are safe here." But even as I spoke, a knock rattled the door. It was sharp, insistent, too familiar. Grace and Ethan tensed, their small bodies stiff against me. I stood, my heart steady, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw them. Richard, his tie loose, his face pale. Margaret clutching her handbag like a lifeline. They looked older, diminished, stripped of the aura they had always carried. I placed my hand on the doorknob but did not turn it yet. Behind me, Olivia whispered from the couch, "They're here, aren't they?" Her voice shook, and for the first time in my life, she sounded afraid of the same people who had once made me feel so small. I closed my eyes, drew in a slow breath, and prepared to face them. I opened the door just enough to let the cold air rush in. Richard's eyes locked on mine, the sharpness dulled but still there under the weight of defeat. Margaret's lips trembled, her hand gripping the strap of her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. For a long moment none of us spoke, the silence heavier than any argument we had ever had. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "Emily, we need to come in." I didn't step aside. Why, he shifted uncomfortably, glancing back at the empty hallway as if worried neighbors might overhear. "Because everything is falling apart, we cannot manage it alone." Behind him, Margaret spoke, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Please, Emily, you are our daughter." The words stung, not because they sounded sincere, but because they were the same words they had always used when they needed something from me. For years, daughter had been a label they wielded like a leash. I straightened my shoulders. "You can come in, but we are doing this my way." They entered slowly, looking around my modest apartment with barely concealed discomfort. Olivia rose from the couch, her eyes wide. "Mom, Dad." Margaret went to her first, clutching her hands. "We will fix this, darling." Olivia's face crumbled. "Fix it how? I have nothing left." Richard cut her off, his voice clipped. "We need Emily's help. Patricia is holding the mortgage. She is threatening to take the house." I crossed my arms. "She is not threatening. She is acting on what you agreed to." Richard's jaw tightened. "You would side with her against your own family." I met his glare evenly. The family does not treat children like servants. The family does not tell grandchildren to eat scraps. The room went quiet. Grace and Ethan peeked from their bedroom door, their eyes wide. I motioned gently for them to stay put. Margaret sank into a chair, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. "What do you want from us, Emily?" For the first time, I realized I had power in this room. My voice was steady. "Respect. For me, for my children. If you want my help, it comes with boundaries." Richard scoffed, but his voice lacked the authority it once held. "And what if we say no?" "Then you walk out that door and figure it out without me," I said calmly. Olivia turned, desperation softening her face. "Emily, please. I know I mocked you. I know I made you feel less. But I have nowhere else to go." Her voice cracked, and for once I saw her as human, not as the golden child who had everything. I took a slow breath. "You can stay here for 2 weeks, but you will follow my rules. You will treat Grace and Ethan kindly, and after that you will find your own way." Olivia nodded quickly, as though afraid I might take the offer back. "Thank you." Richard started to protest, but Margaret touched his arm, silencing him. She looked at me, her eyes wet. "We will agree." For the next hour, the conversation unraveled, truths spilling like loose threads. Richard admitted the company had been losing money for years, each new deal riskier than the last. Margaret confessed to pawning heirlooms to cover expenses. Olivia admitted the mountain of debt she had hidden from Bradley until it destroyed their marriage. Each revelation was sharp, but instead of cutting me down, it carved away the illusion I had carried for so long. At one point, Ethan came out with his blanket, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, are they staying here?" I crouched down and brushed his hair back, "Just for a little while, and only if they are kind." He nodded solemnly, glancing at Olivia. She managed a small smile, tentative and unsure. Later, after they left to gather their things, the apartment was quiet again. Olivia remained behind, sitting at the table with her hands folded. She looked at me, her eyes tired. "I do not know how to do this without pretending anymore." "You start by being honest," I said. "With yourself, with everyone." She gave a shaky nod, and for the first time I believed she might try. Weeks passed. Patricia's attorney drew up the trust securing the future for Grace and Ethan. The mansion was sold, the proceeds swallowed by debts. Richard and Margaret moved into a small condo across town. They visited, sometimes awkward and subdued, but for the first time, they treated my children with genuine warmth. Olivia found part-time work at a boutique, her pride bruised but her steps steadier. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of the house Patricia had helped me buy, watching Grace and Ethan chase each other across the grass. The air was warm, the sun low. Olivia sat on the porch steps, laughing softly at something Ethan said. Richard and Margaret arrived carrying store-bought pie, and no one criticized it. For once, the table we gathered around felt equal. As I cleared the dishes that evening, my father approached me. He shifted awkwardly, his hands in his pockets. "You have built a good life, Emily. A better one than we ever gave you." It was not an apology, but it was the closest he had ever come. And I accepted it. That night, after everyone left, I tucked Grace and Ethan into bed. Ethan whispered, "Mom, are we safe now?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We are safe." I closed their door and leaned against the wall, feeling a peace I had never known. For years, I thought loyalty meant silence, that love meant sacrifice without limits. But now I understand the truth. Boundaries are not walls, they are gates, and for the first time I held the key. If you are listening and you have lived through something similar, if you have carried the weight of a family that only valued you when you served their needs, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments because your voice matters. And if this journey spoke to you, please like and subscribe so these stories can reach others who need to know they are not alone. As I turned off the lights and the house settled into quiet, I smiled to myself. We had walked away from scraps and we had built something better, and that was only the beginning.